Hey there guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Aqua. Today we are going to be reading the next chapter of SOULTIDE. Thank you so much for tuning in. I do not see any warnings right here. I don't, just injuries and there's references to Evo. It looks like I see no trigger warnings, so I apologize if there are, and I missed some. Anyways, a little quick note before we actually get into it. I've decided to discontinue the, I'm blanking on this. To discontinue the discussion episodes. Discontinue discussion episodes. We're going to do it every 5 chapters. Pastel and I have been discussing about this. I was kind of concerned. Well, actually, Pastel came to me with the idea because I was thinking about discontinuing the episodes. They thought it was actually a pretty good idea, so we are still going to continue to do them. They're just going to be more, infrequent. More spread out. So, anyways, be sure to hit the like if you enjoy the episode. Maybe even subscribe. And if you subscribe, maybe consider hitting the notification bell so you never miss when I upload a video. Okay, enjoy the chapter, everyone. Mambo! Scar entered Grian's witch hut starter base with a flourish and too much glee. He spun around, twirling his cane, and came to a stop at the end of the bed Mambo sat on. He took one of Mambo's hands in his. Our hidden beloved, our secret soulmate, our missing corner of our love triangle. Grian followed Scar inside with much less enthusiasm. Can I just block you two up in an obsidian box? Grian, how could you? Scar mock gasped. I thought you loved us. Grian, I'm sure we can handle ourselves, Mambo spoke up, putting down the book he was reading. We can manage to stay safe until this gets fixed. And if things go wrong, Azuma can always bring us back with the admin commands, right? It's not fun being brought back, Grian snapped, wings flaring out. He forced himself to take a deep breath and fold his wings away. I don't want to die either, Scar mediated as he sat on the bed next to Mambo. But I thought you were bringing me over so that we could talk about the soulmate and hardcore thing, not lock us up. Grian sighed. Well, if Tango's feeling Tim's injuries across servers, it wouldn't really help if we went and hid in private flat worlds. I don't even know what this shared damage thing would look like in creative. Finicky redstone doesn't always work the same between worlds, Mambo commented. Coding like the double life mod might not either. For all we know, it might be worse with more distance between us. Grian nodded, then stopped. With that logic, wouldn't it go back to normal on the double life server? Mambo blinked. What's it like over there, then? Well, we still have the same 3-life hardcore mod as last time. Scar and I are on green. Tango's actually yellow with Tim right now. Nobody's on red yet. The injury sharing is pretty much what you've seen already, but Grian has extra coding to keep his wings out of the game, Scar explained. And any VERP injuries or issues don't transfer. So that's why you aren't feeling my chronic pain right now. That's a little reassuring, Mambo admitted. I was honestly worried my VERP stuff would affect you too as well when I finally realized where all the random injuries were coming from. Right. Grian looked out the window, conveniently hiding his embarrassment. In his rush to find Scar, he had completely forgotten to tell Mambo they were soulmates. Wait, you're having less issues? Wait, you're having issues with your VERP? Scar asked. Is it your new wings? Yeah, Doc said I'll need a new pod altogether. Behind Grian, his soulmates went quiet for a moment. Guilt tugged at him over Mambo's predicament, But then again, Mumbo had been the one who decided to harvest someone else's soul and hadn't thought too hard about whose soul he targeted. It was the financial burden that weighed heavily. The Elytrian-style VR pods were expensive. Grian wasn't oblivious to that. The technology needed to be different to hold the player in place without causing harm. And that made it costly. His own pod had lasted him through childhood into his adult years, and he was just glad it had lasted the years. He was lucky. He remembered Pearl complaining about the price of renting one back in Evo. Nowadays, he was the only one on Hermitcraft with that style pod. It made his head hurt, wondering where they were even going to get an Elytrian-style pod. He had no idea if Hermitcraft's research grant was enough to cover a new pod. "Hey, Grian," Scar spoke up. "I don't think we'll have to worry too much about stacking damage." "Yeah? Why's that?" And Grian turned around and Scar dramatically gestured to Mumbo. "Because Mumbo's going to be transferred to a new VERP." Grian raised an eyebrow. "And?" "I've had to get a new VERP a couple times, and he'll be disconnected for the transfer." Scar went on, grinning ear to ear. "Completely removed from the system. The mod coding won't be able to touch him during it. They would probably stretch out our time away to a few days." "Mate, you're not making me feel any better about it," Mumbo mumbled. Scar laughed and offered him a cookie. "You have nothing to worry about, trust me. And by the time you get back, we should have all this sorted out." "It'll be fine, Mumbo," Grian offered his own soft reassurance. "The doctors take good care of us." Mumbo nodded, not looking at them. But Grian noticed a smile under that mustache. He even accepted Scar's cookie. "Grian, have you eaten?" Scar asked. "Have I what? Huh? What? Have you eaten?" Scar repeated. "Since getting back from Double Life, I mean. It's important to take care of yourself, even if Mumbo and I are eating enough to cover your hearts." "I know. I've been busy." "I thought so. Have a cookie." Scar took Grian's hand and stuck one of his patented golden cookies in his palm, then sat back on the bed with a self-satisfied smile. That expression transformed into confusion when he noticed he was sitting down among feathers and preening dust. Grian took a bite of his cookie without comment. "You could ask Azuma to look at the code for your Double Life mod," Mumbo suggested. I did," Grian mumbled through a mouthful of cookie. He swallowed before continuing. "Did it before we all had the first session. Had him look through it, and then I tested it in a small group. Just to make sure that it worked and no phantom limbs or weird traits were coming through." "I was part of the test group," Scar volunteered, brushing some of the preening debris off the bed. "I was part of the tango for exactly 5 minutes, and it didn't carry over when we came back home that time. And this only started after the second session, not the first. Yeah, pinning this glitch down is going to be so hard." "Did you look at the code while it was in action?" Mumbo asked. "Just throwing ideas out here. Maybe there's something appearing or acting weird when it's implemented that you didn't catch before testing." Grian sighed. "I don't have permissions here, so I'd have to jump back to Double Life with some of the members to get a proper look." "So why don't we do that? We have the affected parties right here." Scar gestured to Mumbo and himself. "And there's plenty of people on Hermitcraft who'd be willing to jump over and help out." "But what if it gets worse when switching servers? If we're on hardcore here, does that mean we're on Red Life over there, Scar? And you know Red Lives have that personality change coded in." Grian shook his head. "I can't assure everyone's safety." "Oh, that part doesn't affect me." When Grian stared at him, not understanding, Scar continued. "I don't get the aggression or bloodlust. Probably a Vex thing." What? What? Scar laughed. Yep, just naturally bloodthirsty. Why do you think I was more concerned with stealing a giant cookie than slaughtering everyone in Third Life? What? What do you mean by naturally bloodthirsty? Mumbo cautiously ventured. Scar continued as if he hadn't heard Mumbo's question. Anyway, we could check if Cub's soulmate's with anyone, and if he is, he'd be good. He'd be a good pick for testing as well. You know what? That's not a bad idea. A few years ago, in a peaceful little world, two friends reunited. So what server are you running with now, Tim? Jimmy burst out laughing. His fishing rod went slack in his hand, ignoring another fish playing with the bobber in the pond. Really? We all thought we'd never see you again, and then suddenly you're just here, on my private server. The first thing you do is ask me what server I'm with. Despite the Okay. A few years ago, in a peaceful little world, two friends reunited. So, what server are you running with now, Tim? Jimmy burst out laughing. His fishing rod went slack in his hand, ignoring another fish playing with the bobber in the pond. Really? We all thought we'd never see you again, and then suddenly you're here on my private server, and the first thing you do is ask me what server I'm with? Despite the incredulity in his voice, Jimmy was smiling. Sure, it's a valid question. Is it? I don't know you anymore, Jimmy joked. Grian wondered if it really was a joke. You're not going to come play Watcher games with us if I tell you, right? I'm not a Watcher anymore, Tim. Grian pulled up his fishing rod line and unhooked another cod, tossing it into the barrel. Oh, I'm just an Elytrian. I'm with a server called Hermitcraft now. Oh, so your verb's good then? Pearl told us that all your stuff just disappeared a few days after the end fight in Evo. We all thought it was a Watcher thing. Grian cast his line again. The bobber floated out among the lily pads. Anyway, I'm waiting to join a server called Legacy. I'm definitely in. The admin's just getting things set up. What's Hermitcraft like? It's vanilla, closed and private, so it's kind of like the size of Evo. Everyone goes and does their own thing with big builds. We're all just hermits in that way. Grian grinned. The shopping district turned into chaos last season, and my admin really encouraged me to use my wings. And I ended up making a flight course in the shopping district too. Went so fast at times that I was glitching the server. Wow, yeah, flying was super glitchy on Evo. Jimmy laughed. I'm always afraid I'll smack into something if I fly too fast. Grian snorted a laugh. He pulled his line, but the cod slipped off the hook, falling back into the pond with a splash. They're supposed to be improving the tech side of the server soon, so maybe I can invite you over there sometime, Grian offered. Then you'll know what real flying is like. Solidarity joined the game. Smager 1995 has joined the game. Smallish Beans joined the game. Wings the color of buttercup petals spread wide and shook free loose feathers, and Jimmy couldn't help but smile. It always felt good, and when that piece of him was restored after a long session in the life games. It had only been 2 days, but with the time sped up so they could experience the day-night cycle in 4 days. But the constant activity and chaos made it feel like much longer. Jimmy was just glad and Fwip didn't implement into the same code that Grian used. The Empire's admin had instead added a flight speed restriction on certain players until they proved they had an Elytra. He understood the reason for it, really, but it didn't feel like a good enough reason. His wings were so much more than natural elytra. The burned-down ranch had left the smell of ash and fire scraping the back of his throat. Tumbletown brought with it the dusty smell of red sands and the subtle undercurrent of gunpowder. Jimmy took a deep breath at the second of smells. Rebuilding the ranch had to wait another week. He had logged out in his little house in Tumbletown. So there again he found himself when he logged back in. Deputy Norman greeted him with curious sniffs at his shoes. "Hey there, big man," Jimmy cooed, picking up his cat and sitting on the bed with him. "Do I smell like barn animals in Tango? I'll invite him over sometime. Then you can meet my soulmate properly. Maybe when my empire actually starts looking impressive, though." The server chat was quiet. Here, players hid their communicators under long sleeves and armor, closing off that mode of communication with each other. They lived deep in the stories they wrote for themselves. Whip checked the tab list, noted everyone who needed to be home was home, and went to bed. The sun set in empires without comment. When the sun rose above Tumbletown, Jimmy was already marching deeper underground, and with a purpose and a pickaxe. Today, he would find diamonds. Today would be the day that he got geared up. The one thing he had to keep an eye for was Skulk. He wanted to avoid the warden at all costs. The first arrow struck his leg. Also, all other aggressive mobs, he mentally noted. He needed to keep an eye out for them, too. Caving was dangerous. That much was obvious. Jimmy should have brought a shield. That was also obvious after becoming a pincushion for skeletons and narrowly escaping the blast radius of a creeper. It was a miracle that he was still alive after pulling countless arrows out of himself. Between caves, he was finding himself little niches to dig into for a while. He could catch his breath and eat a snack or two to keep him going. The cave diving expedition was going great. Well, except for the part where he was supposed to be finding diamonds. That wasn't doing so great. Then there was also that glitched block he ran into. Well, Jimmy couldn't confirm it was a glitched block, but he couldn't think of what else it could be. He had just been running through a narrow cave, keeping an eye out for any surprises when he didn't know how to explain it. One minute, he'd been rushing through the cave. The next, a heavy force slammed into his chest like he'd just run into a block. However, he had stumbled forwards through it. A glitched block would have bounced him backwards. Jimmy walled himself into a box and thought about that for far too long. The sun, high up in the sky, shone bright on the mesa when Jimmy emerged from his mine. He wiped sweat and grime from his forehead and stopped for a moment at the mine entrance, checking his inventory for his haul. Deep slate, redstone, gold, more deep slate, and a paltry number of diamonds. Not the best caving trip, but he had found his way back to his original mine, so Jimmy counted it as a win. "Please tell me you were strip mining and not actually caving." Jimmy jumped at the sudden voice. Fumbling to close his inventory, he dropped some cobbled deep slate, and he rushed to collect it up again. A second voice joined the first, just as exasperated. "He's definitely been caving." "Hey!" Jimmy shoved half his inventory in a nearby barrel. He'd pick it up again later. "I can manage to go caving without dying, thank you very much. What do you two want, anyway?" Scott groaned, putting his face in his hands. "He doesn't know," he mumbled from that position of disappointment. "He doesn't know?" Jem gawked from beside Scott. "Jimmy!" That one word was an astonishment in itself. Jimmy frowned, looking between the two, both colorful as could be in his dusty little town. Jem with her sunset gradient of pink and orange, and Scott the Collector reveling in patchwork rainbows. From their expressions of disbelief, scolding, exasperation, well, the list went on, and he didn't have the skill to unpack all that in under a minute. But he could tell he was missing something. What don't I know? Jem promptly shoved a loaf of bread in his hands. Eat, she demanded. He didn't argue. It's about double life, Jimmy, Scott said, raising his head and sounding tired. Actually, when Jimmy really looked at the Collector, he realized Scott was wearing heavy furs. He hadn't clocked it at first, what with the previous season of Empires fresh in his mind. The high mountains of Rivendell had been cold and snowy, and he was used to seeing King Scott in wool and furs, his steps trailing ice in the grass behind him. Hey, aren't you hot? I thought your ice powers made you immune to the cold. The Scott of this season had made a home in a meadow, where the land was green and filled with flowers. My magic doesn't make me immune to frostbite when it's coming from my soulmate, Scott snapped. You're still connected? We're all still connected, Scott corrected. We can't prove Joel and Etho are still connected, but you and I are sharing injuries and with our soulmates. Pearl's been playing in snow for the last few hours. Hermitcraft is in chaos right now, Jem added. Tangle's been taking damage all morning, and it definitely looks like everyone not in Double Life has a soulmate now. Tangle's been taking damage? Jimmy bit his lip. He found another loaf of bread shoved at him. I'm really sorry. I didn't even notice any of his injuries. With all my caving in the dark, I won't go caving again today. You should apologize to him, not us, Scott pointed out. We need to meet up with the other Double Life members to figure things out. But we don't meet again until next week's session. Yeah, but I don't want to spend a week suffering from frostbite, Jimmy. Jimmy winced at Scott's shout. It's Sheriff, he mumbled, choosing to use his hat as a shield. Well, I don't see how I can get over to his server, or him over here. Only Jem and False have permission to go back and forth. The admins do as well, Jem spoke up. Scott nodded. So come on, Jimmy, we're going over to the Cave Empire. Well... Jimmy stared at Jem. Oh no. What? Jem pressed her hands together, a grimace on her face. Flip's in a bit of a mood. Huh? Does it have anything to do with why he's green now? Scott sighed, which was shaky sounding, which was a shaky sound with his shaking. The transformation magic isn't supposed to take that fast. Yeah, actually, Jimmy considered. Why is Flip green and short? I don't know that. He hasn't told me, Jem confessed as she turned to walk away, the skirt of her dress gliding over the red dust. I just think we should talk to Pix instead. Hermitcraft's admin asked me to check up on you guys over here, so he's already in the loop. Jimmy rushed after Scott and Jem before they could leave him behind, shoving what was left of the bread in his inventory. Wait, why Pix? He's not in Double Life. He thought he saw Scott roll his eyes. Sometimes I forget you're fully immersed, Jimmy. Pix actually leaves virtual reality. Jimmy blinked. No, don't. Scott interrupted Jem. He took her hand and tugging her to keep walking. Hey, Jimmy protested. And so it means Pix can get to the control panel of the server, right? The computer's outside? Jem elbowed Scott. See? He got it. Yeah, I'm thinking Pix could talk to the guys overseeing Hermitcraft and figure out the logistics of getting our servers together. So why can't we do that ourselves? Log out. Jimmy, stop talking, Scott warned. Why not? We could disconnect, get away from the soulmate pain. Look at the computers. Stop talking. Jimmy stopped, not because Scott ordered him to, but because Scott pulled a diamond sword on him and swung it. He grabbed the first thing he could to block it, a pickaxe, and was knocked down onto the dusty terracotta. The pain in his hand nearly made him drop the tool. Scott didn't go for a second swing. His hand bled sluggishly, red mixing with the powdered deep slate. Jimmy stared up at Scott, imagining lonely green eyes staring back at his own, yellow, and wondered what he had done to force a green life's hand. But this wasn't double life. The colors here were only dusty oranges and patchwork rainbows. Gem was a soft pink. Yellow daisies had been woven around her antlers. He couldn't see the color of her eyes. She was turned away from them. Scott sheathed his sword. "I told you to stop talking," he said in a quiet voice. As Scott walked down the path, Jimmy rolled up his sleeve, glancing at the hearts on his communicator. The button to log off was right there. It would have been so easy to log off Empires, go to the waiting room, and disconnect from there. But that would mean doing something that Scott was vehemently against. He had seen the innocent suggestion as an attack and had acted accordingly. And although Jimmy didn't see the big deal, he trusted Scott. Anything that put Scott on edge, too. He didn't want to test that. He pulled his sleeve back down over his communicator again and dug in his inventory for a roll of bandages for his hand. Jem and Scott had moved on without him, so Jimmy jogged to catch up. He didn't bring up his suggestion again. Scott led them to a green valley of sort, muted colors, high above over picturesque mountain ranges. Joel's floating home joined the clouds in the sky. A tent and arrangement of chests and workbenches had been set up beside a field of wheat, Pixel Rift's starter base. Yes, the trek hadn't been an easy adventure, with the wild, untamed terrain between the empires not yet paved with roads, and none of them had elytra yet either. Jimmy was lucky in regard. Even with the restrictions, he went carefully and slow enough. He could glide down from high points along the way without glitching on the coding. "Hey, Pix, are you here?" Scott called out. Pixelriff stepped out of his tent and waved at them. No transformation magic touched him. Nothing new covered the patch of scales that glinted in the sunlight on his cheek. Jimmy veered toward the pond in Pixelriff's area, opting out of the conversation. And his comments on the topic had touched some sore nerves for Scott, and he didn't want to accidentally step on more toes. By then, the wound on his hand had closed up. If he and Tango kept their health up, the lingering scar would disappear before the end of the day. He washed the blood and mining grime from his hands in the clear pond water. Out of habit, he splashed water on the sides of his neck before remembering that he didn't need to do that anymore. For the last season, Jimmy had accepted the transformation magic to build his story, diving into the waterlogged life of a siren in the swamp. The gills had taken some time to appear, but now that they were gone, he almost missed them. Instead, he had wings again, canary yellow, and standing in the mesa made him wonder if he looked like the sun at an orange-tinted sunset from above. Conversation continued just out of earshot at the tent. Jimmy chanced to glance over and saw Pixelriff looking his way, something like concern on his face. Jimmy looked away, choosing to preen the dust from his wings. Probably talking about him and Tango. He thought of the first morning on Double Life after finding out they were soulmates, and spending a hectic night scrambling to gather the gear they had died with. After a few minutes of watching him preen, Tango had asked if he could help. "I've watched Grian preen, and I've always been curious," Tango had said. "Can you teach me?" Jimmy had said yes, and done just that. He and Grian used to preen each other's feathers once upon a time. After Grian left Evo, Pearl had tried her hand at it, but when they met again in Legacy, she had wanted nothing to do with his wings. It was nice to have someone else do it for him again. Jimmy shook the water from his wings and walked toward Pixel Rift's tent, checking his communicator to make sure he hadn't taken any damage from Tango without noticing. "I'm not sure what I'll be able to do without Flip's help," Pixel Rifts was saying. "We'll figure it out," Jem insisted. "They have server controls up there, right? Access to the mods and internal coding?" "A bit," Pixel Rifts conceded. "But most of the coding is admin only. And I hate to say this, but this all sounds like a Watcher kind of glitch." Jimmy tripped over his own feet and hurriedly flapped his wings. And the hurried flap of his wings made him glitch, shoving him into the grass like an anvil had fallen on him. "Jimmy, what's wrong?" Scarlet reached to help him up. Jimmy tapped his communicator, found the log out button, and pressed it. The world went dark. The waiting room was bright. It was quiet. Just Jimmy and a computer screen in a tiny villager house. He sank to his knees on the cobblestone floor and wrapped his wings around himself. Most importantly, the waiting room was safe. Watchers couldn't get him here.